Hi everyone, my name is Alexis Rumps, and today I will be talking over and demonstrating primitive and postural reflexes, the stimulation for each of these reflexes, the typical response for each of these reflex stimulations, and the onset and integration timeline for each of these reflexes. This is our model today. Her name is Sophie. She was a baby doll of mine when I was younger, and she will be helping me demonstrate each of these reflexes. Starting off with primitive reflexes, they are reflexes that are often observed at birth, and they can help with survival and development of motor skills. These are typically integrated between 6 to 12 months of age as the larger centers of the brain develop, which allows for the function of voluntary movement, and persistence of these reflexes can indicate developmental delay. One of the first primitive reflexes that I will be demonstrating today is the palmar grasp reflex. So if we take a look at Sophie's hands, she's kind of already demonstrating it. But it is stimulated by applying gentle pressure to the inside of the infant's hand, and the typical response is for them to grasp around the object that is applying pressure. So oftentimes you will think that a baby is just holding your finger and they're holding your hand, but actually it is a primitive reflex that is developed at birth and is integrated between 4 to 6 months of age. And an additional fact about this is that this can stimulate tactile sensors in the hand of the infant, which can help in developing the sensory system. The second primitive reflex that I will be demonstrating today is the plantar grasp reflex. This is very similar to the palmar grasp reflex, but just utilizes the infant's foot instead of the hand. So similar to the palmar grasp reflex, the plantar grasp reflex is stimulated by applying pressure to the infant's ball of the foot. The typical response is for the toes to curl downwards toward the stimulus. This often is appearing at birth and disappears between 9 to 12 months of age. And an additional fact about this reflex is that it helps the infant gain foot control for things such as walking. The third primitive reflex that I will be demonstrating today is the moro or the startle reflex. So this reflex is often demonstrated when the infant is seated in a semi-reclined position and a sudden loss of support is demonstrated, so such as gently lowering them, or sometimes parents or family likes to play drop and then bring it back up to see the reaction. So this is when the moro or startle reflex is stimulated. So the typical response for this reflex is when the sudden loss of support is engaged, the infants will also often exercise extension and then flexion of their arms and will also often cry. So this reflex appears at birth and is integrated between 4 and 6 months of age. An additional fact about this reflex is that it is often an involuntary reflex and can aid in survival. The fourth primitive reflex that I will be demonstrating today is the rooting reflex. This reflex is stimulated by a gentle brushing or stroking of the infant's cheek or by the mouth. The typical response of this reflex is that the infant will often turn their head and open their mouth in response to the stimulus. This often appears at birth and disappears by 4 months of age. And an additional fact about this reflex is that if this reflex is not present, it often presents a difficulty when latching for feeding. The fifth primitive reflex that I'll be demonstrating today is the sucking reflex. This is stimulated by applying pressure to the infant's lips or mouth, and the typical response is that the infant will start sucking on whatever is placed inside their mouth or at their lips. This often appears at birth and integrates between 4 and 6 months of age. And an additional fact of this reflex is that if this is not present, it also often creates difficulty when feeding, and this reflex allows sucking to become automatic. So moving on to postural reflexes. Postural reflexes are reflexes that appear after birth and help maintain balanced posture and coordination and movement as the infant grows. These can help support advanced motor skills such as sitting, walking, and crawling, and these often persist into adulthood in modified forms to help maintain balance and posture. So the first postural reflex that I'll be demonstrating is called the neck riding reflex. So this reflex is often demonstrated with the infant lying on their back, typically on the floor, but I'll be doing it up in the air today for simplicity of demonstration. So this is often stimulated by a gentle turning of the infant's neck, often followed by the sequential rolling of the shoulders, trunk, and pelvis so that the infant turns on their back. This often appears shortly after birth and disappears between 4 to 6 months of age. And if this reflex is not present, it often presents difficulty with head control, walking, balance. The second postural reflex that I'll be demonstrating today is called the body riding reflex. This is often similar to the neck riding reflex, but with a little bit of differency. So this is often stimulated by the infant attempting to lay down, but there is a turn in the shoulders and the hips, which often sequentially follows in the rest of the body, turning to all be the same way. This usually appears between 4 to 6 months of age and disappears between 12 to 18 months of age. If this reflex is not present, it often presents difficulty in advanced motor skills for the infant, such as sitting up, walking. The third postural reflex I'll be demonstrating today is referred to as the pull-up reflex. This is often stimulated when the infant is pulled to a sitting position from a lying position by their hands. The typical response is when the infant will flex their arms when you assist them in pulling up to assist in their own sitting up of themselves. The typical appearance of this reflex is between 3 to 4 months of age, and it disappears typically between 8 to 12 months. If this reflex is not present, it can indicate a problem with the central nervous system and indicate a neurological dysfunction. The postural reflex that I will be demonstrating today is known as the parachute reflex. This reflex is stimulated by holding the infant in an upright position and then lowering them suddenly. The typical response for this reflex is that when the infant is lowered, their arms will extend and the fingers will spread to often break their fall. The typical appearance of this reflex is between 6 to 9 months of age, and it often persists throughout life as a protective reflex. An additional fact of this reflex is that it is a protective mechanism for infants to prevent them from serious injury. Lastly, the fifth postural reflex that I will be demonstrating today is the Landau reflex. You can stimulate this reflex by laying the infant flat on their belly with support under their abdomen. The typical response for this reflex is that the infant will extend their arms, their legs, their neck, and their spine, often resembling the Superman position. This reflex often appears between 3 to 4 months of age and disappears between 12 to 24 months of age. And an additional fact about this reflex is that it helps in muscle definition and tone for the neck and the back of the infant. Thank you for watching, and I hope that those 5 primitive and 5 postural reflexes that I demonstrated helped to gain understand about infant reflexes as a whole.